Welcome to The Explainer. We're here to break down huge, complex events by looking right at the source material behind them.
Imagine waking up to this, January 3rd, 2026. Explosions are rocking Caracas, Venezuela's capital. In the early hours of the morning, people are hearing these blasts, targeting key military sites. For the citizens of Venezuela, it was the start of a day that was about to change absolutely everything.
So how did the world find out what was really happening? Well, not through some official press briefing. No, it came from a single post on social media. The President of the United States announced that the leader of a sovereign nation, Nicolás Maduro, and his wife were now in U.S. custody. I mean, talk about a geopolitical earthquake in under 280 characters. Absolutely stunning.
Now, this wasn't some internal power struggle or a coup from within. This was an extraction from the outside. So the big question is, how on earth did U.S. forces manage to capture a sitting head of state?
I mean, just think about this for a second. This is completely unprecedented. You've got the sitting head of state and the First Lady physically removed from their own country, flown all the way to New York, and then taken to Manhattan to face federal charges. It's wild. And back in Venezuela, the government, which, by the way, did not collapse, immediately called it exactly what they saw it as, a kidnapping.
So, Maduro gets his day in court. But here's the twist. He gets into that Manhattan federal court and completely rejects the entire premise of the trial. He pleaded not guilty, sure, but he went a huge step further. He basically said, "I'm not a criminal defendant. I am the president of Venezuela. You captured me at my home. I am a prisoner of war." That just reframes the entire situation, doesn't it?
An operation of this scale, it doesn't just happen overnight. As the source material shows us, Operation Absolute Resolve wasn't some sudden decision. It was the final move in a geopolitical chess game that had been playing out for years, followed by months of incredibly meticulous secret planning.
And you can actually trace the path to this intervention right here on this timeline. It's fascinating. It didn't start with bombs. It started with lawyers way back in March 2020 when the U.S. indicted Maduro on narco-terrorism charges. Then you fast forward to 2025, you see this huge military buildup, then a full-on naval blockade. Finally, the announcement of strikes, and just one day later, the operation is a go. It was a slow, deliberate escalation from the courtroom right to the battlefield.
And this was a massive, seriously coordinated effort. We're talking about the best of the best. The Army's Delta Force, the CIA, the FBI hostage rescue team. And the air power was just overwhelming, over 150 aircraft. To make sure they got it right, military officials even said they built and rehearsed the raid on a full-scale mock-up of Maduro's compound. They were leaving absolutely nothing to chance.
But of course, an operation like this comes at a heavy human cost. The U.S. reported only 2 of its soldiers were injured. On the other side, Venezuelan officials estimated that over 80 people were killed. And that number, according to the Cuban government, included 32 of its own military and security personnel who were stationed in the country.
So that brings us to the big question. Why? Why take such a drastic, historic step? While the official justification from the Trump administration was complex. It really rested on 2 very different pillars, drugs and oil.
So let's break down these 2 official justifications, because they almost sound like they're from completely different playbooks.
Okay, so on one hand, this whole thing was framed as a law enforcement action. The story was they were just going in to capture Maduro based on that 2020 indictment that called him the leader of a narco state. But on the other hand, there was this very explicit move to gain control over Venezuela's most valuable asset, and we're talking about the world's largest proven oil reserves.
And if you had any doubt at all about the oil part, well, President Trump himself cleared that up. At a press conference on the very day of the capture, he said it plain as day. We're in the oil business, we'll be selling oil. You really can't get much more direct than that.
Okay, so Maduro is now in U.S. custody. What happens next in Venezuela, and how did the rest of the world react? As you can probably imagine, the aftermath was immediate, and it was chaotic. So this is a really crucial point. The U.S. may have taken the leader, but the government in Caracas did not collapse. Vice President Delcy Rodríguez was sworn in as acting president right away, which created a situation that analysts started calling Madurismo without Maduro. The idea being the ruling ideology and the power structure were still intact, even if the figurehead was gone.
And the public reaction? It was immediate and completely polarized. In cities like Miami, you had Venezuelan exiles who were overjoyed, celebrating in the streets. But at the very same time, you had fierce protests erupting in places like Times Square, with people condemning the intervention, chanting "No blood for oil."
right alongside pro-Maduro demonstrations back in Caracas. A total clash of realities.
Back in Washington, this thing immediately became a political firestorm. Republicans pretty much lined up behind the action, calling it a decisive and justified operation. Democrats, on the other hand, condemned it as an illegal war and an act of latter-day imperialism, warning it could drag the U.S. into another messy, long-term conflict.
So let's zoom out from the immediate chaos for a minute. What does an event like this mean for the future? Because an action like this, it doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It could set a powerful and maybe even dangerous new precedent for U.S. foreign policy and for the entire world.
And President Trump himself framed this in very historic terms. He called it the Don Roe Doctrine. Now, that's obviously a very intentional play on the famous 19th century Monroe Doctrine, which warned European powers to stay out of the Americas. This new doctrine, though, it's a much more assertive claim. It's basically a signal of a new era of American dominance in its own backyard.
Yeah, but try telling that to international law experts. They saw it very, very differently. Many of them, including a UN Special Rapporteur, weren't buying the law enforcement story at all. They labeled it a crime of aggression. In international law, that is a huge deal. It's basically an unprovoked attack, and it's considered one of the most serious violations of the UN Charter. You know, the rulebook that's supposed to prevent this exact kind of thing.
Geopolitically, the move sent shockwaves right through the global energy markets. Think about it from the perspective of countries like China and India. For them, Venezuelan oil was valuable because it was an independent supply source outside of Washington's direct influence. Now, overnight, it's become a conditional supply, mediated by the U.S., and that fundamentally changes their energy security and the entire global game.
And this leaves us with a final provocative thought. Has a new playbook just been written for how superpowers interact with resource-rich nations? Whether this event is seen as a unique action against the so-called narco-state or as the dawn of a new era of resource imperialism, the answer is undoubtedly going to shape international relations for years to come.